our theme music.
If you have been wondering why what feels like the entirety of the executive branch have this hive mind with similar talking points, similar responses, and seemingly similar political reform goals, I think it is time that we pull back the curtain a little bit further so that we can understand that it is not just Elon Musk who is in the driver's seat of the executive branch. Because there is a figure who I'm sure you guys have heard of at this point named Curtis Yarvin, and he sometimes will use the pen name Mincius Moldbug in his writings. This man is someone that everyone needs to be aware of, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it is really true. You cannot fight your enemy if you do not know your enemy. Sometimes the only weapon we have to fight with is information. If you are someone who is a minority, a person of color, someone in the LGBTQ community, someone with a disability, lock in. This man, Curtis Yarvin, he despises us to such visceral lengths, and he is also very well respected by many of our elected officials, which should alarm and anger you. Because of the nature of these alt-right spaces in the tech world and everything that comes along with Curtis Yarvin, it can be very hard to dissect and fully understand what this man believes and represents and advocates for. So I am breaking this down in the most comprehensive way that I can. I will also at the same time encourage you to continue to do your own research as well, because there is so much information out there. But I think what we need to really get to is all to have a basic understanding of who this man is, how he is connected to our administration, and why he is so dangerous. As always, let's go back to the beginning. Curtis Guy Yarvin is a Jewish American man who was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1973. Somewhat surprisingly, Curtis Yarvin was born into a family that had very liberal beliefs and were very devout Protestants. Curtis Yarvin's father, Herbert Yarvin, worked as a diplomat for the United States government. Curtis Yarvin has shared in later interviews that his father was the one who inspired him to begin thinking outside of the box. From a very young age, Curtis Yarvin's parents recognized that their son was very academically gifted, especially mathematically. In 1985, Curtis Yarvin's parents entered him into Johns Hopkins program of the study of mathematically precocious youth, which was one of the most prestigious programs for gifted youth at the time. After graduating from high school, Curtis Yarvin would be accepted into Brown University, where he would attend from 1988 to 1992. After graduating from Brown University, Curtis Yarvin would begin his graduate program at UC Berkeley, seeking a PhD in computer sciences. About halfway through his graduate program, Curtis Yarvin would drop out of school and he would join a software development company called Telerik as a software engineer. Probably remember from the Elon Musk deep dive, it was right around this time, the late 90s, the early 2000s, when there was this big .com boom, the big internet boom, and the tech world started moving at an extreme speed. Working at Telerik would be Curtis Yarvin's catalyst into immersing himself into Silicon Valley tech bro world and ideology. In fact, much of the present day toxic tech bro culture that we see today is largely inspired by Curtis Yarvin and his philosophy, which we'll get more into shortly. If you think that this guy's beliefs are just your run-of-the-mill extremist conservative ideology, then buckle in, because Curtis Yarvin is one of the figures who helped curate and produce J.D. Vance, our vice president. So in the early 2000s, Curtis Yarvin began consuming a lot of literature and economic theories that were written and taught by figures who had connections to the Austrian School of Economics, which is based in Vienna, Austria. And just a side note for your own understanding, the Austrian School of Economics was founded in the 1800s and teaches an economic theory that has been highly criticized worldwide. Very simplistically, the majority of people who study the economy believe that the economy can only accurately be studied and predicted when analyzing historical and statistical data while utilizing mathematics and considering the current administrative policies. On the other hand, the Austrian School of Economics rejects the use of mathematical and statistical analysis, and the Austrian school teaches that recessions are necessary to restore the market to equilibrium, which is why Many economics find that the theory that the Austrian school teaches is nothing more than an illegitimate theory. Along with being criticized for teaching illegitimate theories, they are also criticized for their advocacy of lack of government intervention and lack of government oversight in the economy, especially within banking. So, for example, the Austrian school would teach that entities like the Consumer Financial Bureau of Protection that protects the everyday American financially should not exist and should be abolished and are only a harm to the economy, which very closely mirrors what we're seeing in our current administration with the attempt to abolish the CFPB. It helps some of the politicians that you may recognize that have supported ideas made by the Austrian School of Economics include Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. As Curtis Yarvin began to become more immersed in the tech bro ideology, the tech bro world, he eventually came to the conclusion that America could not survive living as a democracy. He also came to the belief that America has a problem with dictatorship phobia, and it's something we need to get past if we want to see society thrive.
The other thing about getting rid of your government is you can't just say, well, the limits of the government are the limits of the formal government. You have to say, well, what is the system actually? And it includes a lot of things that are called NGOs, things that are called universities, things that are funded by the state. It's a very, very large system, and it all needs to be destroyed. You need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over dictator phobia.
Throughout the early 2000s, Curtis Yarvin's extremism was brewing per se, but he was still very involved in the tech world. And in 2002, he started his own tech company called Urbit, which was basically just a peer-to-peer network of personal servers. Remember, this is the early 2000s. The internet is not what it is today. But it was around this time that Curtis Yarvin decided to begin to share some of the extremism that had been brewing within him on a political blog. But it wasn't really until 2008, after President Obama had been elected into office, where Curtis Yarvin's ideology really took a plunge off the deep end into extremism. Curtis Yarvin became very active in the world of political commentary under the pen name Mencius Moldbug. So one thing about people like Curtis Yarvin who have very extreme beliefs and are also somewhat in the public eye, when they are verbalizing their hatred, they have to engage in this word salad, deflection, runaround argument, not only to make it palatable to the public, but also to create a little bit of plausible deniability. After consuming far too much of this guy's writings to the point that it put me in a dark place, I have condensed some of the most shocking and alarming values that this man holds, some that we are actively watching play out before our eyes. So Curtis Yarvin believes that society cannot flourish unless it takes a strong and immediate anti-equality stance, starting from the most powerful offices in the government all the way down to institutions that employ everyday Americans. Why? Because Curtis Yarvin believes that equality is the destruction of efficiency. Curtis Yarvin is also staunchly anti-immigration and anti-multiculturalism, which simply means he's pro-nationalism. And you've heard Elon Musk very recently share his disdain for multiculturalism at a far-right political event in Germany that he attended via web conference.
It's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
Curtis Yarvin believes that genetically, white people have a higher IQ than any other race right off the bat, and we're just jumping into it right off the bat. He's saying he's pro-nationalism and believes that white people have the highest IQ of any race. So what does that tell us? What kind of nationalist is he? Okay. Curtis Yarvin also believes that the United States should be run like a business or a corporation, and that the president should have the same kind of power as a CEO of any kind of business or corporation. The president should be able to fire and hire and change whatever he wants at will without having to deal with the checks and balances of democracy. Curtis Yarvin believes that long-term, the best thing that could happen to the United States is to abolish the election process entirely, invest all power into a single entity, democracy, being the president of the United States or the CEO of the United States. Curtis Yarvin sees the democratic checks and balances as a waste of time and just slowing down civilization, which is not entirely surprising because in general, he has a very warm embrace towards dictators, dictatorship, even figures such as the Mustache Man. Despite being a Jewish American man himself, he has even made comments stating that unless lived in the triple digits, they were useless. It's undeniable when you read what this man believes, how much he looks up to figures such as the Mustache Man, which is very alarming. Curtis Yarvin is extremely critical of liberal or progressive ideology and people who hold that ideology, remembering that he grew up in a family that held more liberal viewpoints. But it goes further than Curtis Yarvin disagreeing with the left. He believes that people who think progressively or have liberal ideology are a danger to society. Reason being is that he believes that people who lean towards the left are far too focused on equality and individual rights that it ultimately just slows down the progress of society. And here's where it gets a little scary. Curtis Yarvin believes that people who lean to the left or people who do not align with his beliefs and ideologies are so dangerous that the government should round them up and place them in what he describes as virtual reality prisons where they can live out the rest of their lives comfortably. He believes that this is a valid solution because people who do not align with him don't want to see society progress. Curtis Yarvin also believes that unhoused people and people who rely on government assistance, such as food stamps, welfare, housing assistance, healthcare assistance, etc., are nothing more than undesired elements of society that need to be eliminated. And Curtis Yarvin was asked in an interview what he believes the solution is to these undesirable elements of society, being people who are unhoused, people who need government assistance, people who lean to the left, what he believes a reasonable solution would be, other than VR prisons, which he believes is a very reasonable solution. And while he didn't come up with a direct answer, I'm going to read you a quote from this interview, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Our goal, in short, is a humane alternative to G-side. That is, the ideal solution achieves the same result as mass unaliving, but without any of the moral stigma. So he's basically trying to say we need to come up with a humane solution that mirrors the extermination of these people without the moral consequences of mass unalivings. Curtis Yarvin actually wrote out a manifesto, a blueprint on how to make his ideology a reality in America. And it's really a step-by-step plan on how to dismantle a democracy. And this manifesto was named RAGE, and it is acronyms for Retire All Government Employees.
Simple four-letter acronym, which is RAGE. And RAGE stands for Retire All Government Employees.
This manifesto very, very, very much mirrors Project 2025, which proposes for the removal of all checks and balances within the government. Curtis Yarvin is also a very big advocate for a technocratic government and technocrats running the government. And we talked about technocracy in the Elon Musk deep dive. I'll put that video in the description if you need a little refresher about what technocracy is. Curtis Yarvin believes in the basic principles of technocracy, including controlling the technate and beyond, Greenland, Panama Canal, etc., etc. You can slice it and dice it however you want, technocracy, dictatorship, whatever it is. Curtis Yarvin ultimately believes in concentrating all powers into one singular individual, the CEO of the United States, or a very small group of powerful, wealthy men who all have the same mindset. Curtis Yarvin shared all of these beliefs shamelessly on his blog posts throughout the years and was fully immersed in the tech world, which caused a perfect storm. A lot of young tech bros who were entering the Silicon Valley tech world became very immersed and enamored by Curtis Yarvin's philosophy for many different reasons. Some of the figures who we observe in present day who have latched on to Curtis Yarvin's philosophy would include figures like Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Kimball Musk, David Sachs, really the key figures who were in the PayPal mafia, all held Curtis Yarvin's philosophy at a very high regard and very high respect. One important piece of Curtis Yarvin and the conclusions that he has drawn come from a theory called Dark Enlightenment.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm Dark MAGA.
Enlightenment is this like underground, but not so much anymore, neo-reactionary movement. The term Dark Enlightenment was originally coined by a philosopher named Nick Land. Dark Enlightenment really is like the framework for Curtis Yarvin's belief systems. Notably, journalists, political scientists, and political commentators have described Dark Enlightenment to be rooted in fascism and just an attempt to convince the public that they want an authoritarian ruler. Really, their ultimate goal is to begin to sow seeds of distrust within the public towards our system of checks and balances. It's really just a movement to create public support in dismantling democracy, promising to replace it with something shiny and new. Dark Enlightenment rejects democracy as a whole, but accepts the need to embrace the democratic system in order to dismantle the democratic system. In Dark Enlightenment, and Curtis Yarvin believe that people who fall in line with this belief system are amoral realists, amoral being the complete disregard of the existence of right and wrong. So if you're wondering why this current administration and why all these executive orders feel so cruel, they don't feel anything about it and they sleep just fine at night because they're operating in a amoral headspace with the ultimate goal of creating their idealistic society and are not afraid to plow down anyone who gets in their way for the greater good. Dark Enlightenment is especially prevalent in certain supremacy groups in the United States. So now that you have kind of a basic understanding of Curtis Yarvin's upbringing and how he came into the tech world and how he came to the beliefs that he has now, let's talk about how his very, very extreme beliefs are now becoming a reality in our United States. Let's start with his connection with Peter Thiel. We talked about Peter Thiel in the Elon Musk deep dive. I'll put those videos in the description so you can go back and watch if you want, but just a quick reminder, Peter Thiel was born in Germany, spent most of his childhood growing up in apartheid South Africa, went to Stanford University along with David Sachs, who is Donald Trump's AI czar, and they wrote and published a book in 1995 stating that affirmative action was the worst thing that ever happened to America. He was one of the main figures who helped create PayPal and was in the PayPal mafia, owns the military intelligence company Palantir. He was one of the first investors in Facebook. He's invested in YouTube, LinkedIn, SpaceX, Tesla, just to name a few. Peter Thiel was an advisor during Trump's first presidency. So one of the big head honchos in the Silicon Valley tech world. And for well over a decade, Peter Thiel has considered Curtis Yarvin a close personal friend and kind of like an in-house philosopher. Many of the beliefs that Peter Thiel holds come from directly Curtis Yarvin. So as we know, our sitting vice president, J.D. Vance, got his start in the venture capitalist world. And his mentor and former employer, Peter Thiel, is really the one who purchased him his seat not only as a senator, but Peter Thiel's finances also catapulted him into the vice presidency as well. And J.D. Vance has been very much inspired by the teachings of Curtis Yarvin. On a podcast in 2021, J.D. Vance shared his admiration for Curtis Yarvin's writing. He went on to share that if Donald Trump was reelected, he should implement Curtis Yarvin's manifesto, Rage, retire all government employees.
Now, there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things. Step one in the process is to totally replace, like rip out like a tumor, the current American leadership.
And replace them with loyalists. And again, Curtis Yarvin's retire all government employees, Rage, is almost a mirror to Project 2025 or America First, whatever they're calling it now. So the reason we're seeing such a crank up of this extreme and this hateful rhetoric is because this is all a part of the manifesto. This is all a part of the plan, and they feel fine by doing it because they're operating from an amoral place for the betterment of society in their minds. And if you think Curtis Yarvin is just some random computer programmer who is sitting in his basement and his office in Silicon Valley, that is far from the truth. In fact, Curtis Yarvin attended Donald Trump's 2025 coronation ball as an informal guest of honor. Now, there is so much more to Curtis Yarvin, to his beliefs, to his history in the tech world and in his writings, that is the framework of what he believes, and that our vice president believe, and many, many others. That is the framework of what is happening within our democracy, within our government right now, is his manifesto playing out. So I know these things and these ideas and these theories feel out there, but take it seriously. I know it seems so out there, living in a VR prison because you have a different belief system or a different ideology or political thought, or you are unhoused, or you need government assistance, and your punishment for that is going into like a VR prison as an alternative to just exterminating you. The hive mind that we see in our current administration all comes back, all trails back to Curtis Yarvin. As always, I encourage you guys to do your own research on this topic, on this person, on these people, and I will see you guys in the next one.